had any money, I snatched this plant off my grandma's front porch. Tucked it into my arm. And then he turns around, goes running out the building. And I go chasing after him, he jumps in his broken down car and disappears. Well, several months after that, I'm in my office, open up the newspaper. What's on the front page? Well, it turns out the Oakland Writers police scandal is broken. Turns out that a gang of police officers, otherwise known as a drug task force, had been planting drugs on suspects, beating folks up in his neighborhood. Who was identified as one of the main officers charged with planting drugs on suspects and beating folks up? Officer, he had identified to me, planting drugs on him and beat up his friend. And it was at that moment that the light bulb finally started to go on for me. And I thought to myself, he's right about me. I am no better than the police. The minute he told me he was a felon, I just stopped listening. Couldn't even hear what I had to say. And that was the beginning of me asking myself some hard questions about myself as a civil rights lawyer and advocate. How am I actually replicating the very forms of discrimination, exclusion, and marginalization I'm supposedly fighting against? And I also started asking myself, why is it that we haven't been able to find one young black man in his neighborhood they haven't gotten to yet? What is really going on? And that was the beginning of my own journey of asking myself and others a lot of hard questions and listening more carefully to the stories of those cycling in and out of prison. And what I learned in that process was that my great crime wasn't in failing to represent an innocent man. My great crime was in imagining that there was some path to racial justice that did not include those we view as guilty. We find ourselves today, despite the election of Barack Obama, despite the appearance of colorblindness, the superficial appearance of colorblindness, in a position that is eerily reminiscent of an age we supposedly left behind. As I stated in the introduction to my book, what has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society than the language we use to justify it. In the era of colorblindness, it is no longer socially permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt. So we don't. Rather than rely on race, we use our criminal justice system to label people of color criminals and then engage in all the practices that we supposedly left behind. Today, it is perfectly legal to discriminate against criminals in nearly all the ways in which it was once legal to discriminate against African Americans. Once you're labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, exclusion from jury service, suddenly legal. As a criminal, you have scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it. Today, in major American cities, more than half of working-age African American men now have criminal records and are thus subject to legalized discrimination for the rest of their lives.
Right.
In cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, it's already been documented that the rates are far higher. In Chicago, for example,